Her hand brushed mine as she reached for the coffee mug between us. Just a casual moment, nothing intentional. But her fingers lingered. Not long, just enough. The hum of the cafe filled the silence, but everything in me paused. Her wedding ring caught the morning light. She didn't look up, didn't speak, just wrapped her fingers around the cup, lifted it gently, and took a slow sip, like nothing had happened. But I knew it had. I never meant to notice her like that. Not in that way. Not at first. I just moved back home after a stint in the city that left me drained, broke, and carrying a freshly printed film degree like it meant something. My dad's old friend offered me a job helping out at his small art gallery downtown, a quiet, brick-walled place tucked between a bakery and a florist. Mostly I ran errands, updated the website, swept floors, and sat behind the front desk pretending to look busy. She walked in one rainy Thursday in early April. At first, I thought she was just another wealthy customer, mid-40s, perfectly put together, the kind of woman who spoke in soft, measured tones and owned scarves that cost more than my monthly rent. But she didn't browse. She didn't make small talk. She asked to speak with Thomas, the gallery owner, and introduced herself as Helen Wexler. That name meant something. She was a well-known local sculptor who hadn't exhibited in years. I knew her work, clean lines, marble and bronze, timeless in a way that always stuck with you. What I didn't know was how it would feel to stand near her, how her presence would carry something weighty, like she knew exactly who she was and had no desire to prove it to anyone. Thomas wasn't in that day. I told her that, offered to take a message, maybe schedule something. She smiled faintly, said it wasn't urgent. Then, instead of leaving, she wandered through the gallery. Quiet, thoughtful, pausing before each piece like it had secrets to share. I stayed behind the desk, pretending to reorganize brochures, but I kept watching her. It wasn't her beauty that got to me. She was beautiful, in a way that was almost severe, sharp cheekbones, slate gray eyes, dark hair swept up like she didn't care if a few strands fell loose. But it was her stillness, like the world bent around her pace. She stopped in front of one of the newer pieces, a hanging installation of thin, backlit acrylic, and stood there longer than most visitors ever did. Finally, she turned. "This one's a bit desperate," she said, not unkindly. "Just honest." I blinked. Desperate how? She stepped closer, and for the first time, really looked at me. It's trying too hard to be meaningful. When art begs to be understood, it often says too much. I didn't know what to say to that, so I just nodded. Her eyes lingered on me for a beat too long. Then she turned back to the piece. "Tell Thomas Helen Wexler stopped by. He'll remember me." I watched her walk out, umbrella opening like a black wing above her head. The bell over the door jingled once, then silence. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about her. Something had passed between us. Not a spark exactly, more like the faintest flicker of recognition, of unspoken tension. And I knew, whatever this was, it wasn't over. She came back the following week. Just like that, no warning, no appointment. I was behind the front desk again, half listening to an ambient podcast while pretending to update the inventory log. The door chimed, and when I looked up, she was already inside, umbrella dripping onto the rug. A streak of rain clung to her coat sleeve. She shook it off gently, then met my eyes. "Hi," she said. Simple, calm. My throat tightened, but I stood quickly. "Hey, Thomas still isn't in." "I know," she said. "I came to look around. If that's all right." "Of course." She didn't wait, just drifted toward the back, where the newer installations were, pieces by local artists, some just starting out. She moved differently this time, more deliberate. Every so often, she'd pause, tilt her head, studying some detail I hadn't even noticed. I watched from the desk, trying to stay casual. But the longer she stayed, the more my nerves kicked in. I wasn't used to someone like her, someone who said so little and yet filled the room entirely. Finally, she circled back toward me, her gaze trailing the worn floorboards. "You're not just the desk guy," she said, stopping a few feet away. "I can tell." I blinked. "What makes you say that?" "The way you look at the work. You're not just passing time. You're listening." I tried to smile, but it came out crooked. I studied film, editing mostly. Never had the nerve to call myself an artist. Helen nodded, almost approvingly. "Film is stillness in motion. That's harder to do than sculpture, in some ways." That surprised me. "You really think so?" She stepped closer. Not too close, but close enough that I caught the subtle scent of her perfume. Clean, almost woody. Editing is about restraint, she said. Choosing what to leave out. That's the real art. I was silent. She looked at me, not with curiosity, but with awareness. Like she saw more than she should. Like she was used to knowing when she was being looked at differently. Then she said, "Do you want to see my studio?" I wasn't expecting that. Yeah, I said quickly, too quickly. Sure. I mean, if that's okay. Her smile was faint but real. Tomorrow, 3 o'clock. I'll text you the address. How? I had Thomas give me your number. Hope you don't mind. I didn't. Not even close. She left without saying anything more, the door chiming softly behind her. That night, I stared at her message for too long. Helen Wexler. Studios in the old granary lofts by the river. Building C, 3rd floor. Bring curiosity, leave ego. See you at 3. I didn't sleep much. Not out of excitement exactly, but something heavier. A weight in my chest I couldn't name. This wasn't a crush. It wasn't even desire, not yet. It was curiosity laced with caution. That pull you feel towards something you know might undo you, piece by piece, but you lean in anyway. The next day I left early. Too early. I walked the river path for almost an hour, trying to shake off the anxiety. The granary lofts rose like rusted ghosts ahead, industrial shells repurposed into studios and overpriced apartments. Her building looked forgotten. No signage. Just a buzzer by the door, worn numbers etched into steel. I pressed 303. Her voice came through, low and familiar. Come up. The elevator groaned all the way to the 3rd floor. When the door slid open, I stepped into a hallway flooded with late afternoon light. Her studio door was open. Inside, the space felt timeless. Rough wooden beams stretched across the ceiling. Marble slabs leaned against walls. A few pieces stood mid-process, shrouded, half-shaped, silent. She was standing at a table near the window, pulling off her gloves. She wore a dark green sweater, sleeves rolled up, hair loosely tied back. No makeup, no jewelry, except the ring. "Welcome," she said softly. "Thanks for inviting me." She gestured around. "This is where I make a mess and call it meaning." I laughed under my breath. She looked at me, amused, and for the first time, the weight in her eyes lightened. For the next hour, she walked me through the space, not explaining everything, but letting me into it. We didn't talk about ourselves, not directly. But we talked about shape, about negative space, about what silence can say if you let it. When I reached toward a small marble bust, half a face, carved an exhale, she stopped me gently. Her hand touched my wrist. "Don't. The oils in your skin will stain it." Her fingers lingered. The moment did too. I nodded. She let go. As the sun began to fall, she poured us tea, her motions unhurried. "I don't invite people here often," she said, eyes on the window. "Why me?" She looked at me then, and for a second, there was something naked in her expression, something unguarded. "Because you noticed," she said, "and you don't ask for too much." We didn't speak after that. Not because there was nothing left to say, but because the quiet between us had become something else entirely. When I finally left, she didn't walk me out. But as I stepped into the hallway and turned to glance back, I saw her in the doorway, watching me. Not smiling, not sad, just watching. Like she wasn't ready to let me go just yet. I didn't go back to the gallery the next day. I called in and said I wasn't feeling well. That wasn't a lie, exactly, just not the whole truth. Truth was, I couldn't stop replaying everything. The shape of her studio, the silence of it, the way her hand had closed around my wrist, not with urgency, but with care. And what she said before I left, "You don't ask for too much." That line stuck with me. I wasn't sure what she meant by it, but it followed me everywhere. Into the kitchen, into sleep, into the strange stillness of morning coffee, where I found myself thinking less about her face and more about her silence. How present it was. How weighted. 2 days passed before I heard from her again. The message came in late, a single photo. A sculpture in progress. Just the curve of a neck, the suggestion of shoulders. Nothing else. No caption. I stared at it for a long time before typing. "Is this new?" She replied, "Since you left." I didn't know what to say after that. So I said nothing. And she didn't message again. But I kept the image saved on my phone. Saturday came. Cold and brittle. I walked to the bakery next to the gallery before my shift and stood in line too long, not because I wanted anything, but because it was the only place I knew she sometimes came to. I didn't see her. I went into work anyway, late. Thomas noticed. He always did. "You all right?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "Just thinking too much lately." He nodded like he understood. Then, after a pause, he added, "Helen Wexler's got that effect on people, especially young men." I looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" He shrugged. "She has a way of pulling things out of people they don't know they're hiding. It's not intentional. She just sees things. And once she does, it's hard not to feel a little exposed." I said nothing, just folded a flyer and tucked it beneath the counter. Later that evening, as I was locking up, I found her card pinned beneath a paperweight on the desk. No note, just her name and number. I stared at it a long time. That night, I didn't sleep again. Instead, I walked. I left my apartment at midnight and wandered through the sleeping streets until I found myself near the river, beneath the granary lofts. The lights were out in her window. No sign of movement. Still, I stood there like a fool, hands in my coat pockets, looking up. The next morning, she texted, "Helen Wexler, I couldn't sleep last night. Did you walk by the studio?" I stared at the screen, pulse suddenly sharp in my throat. "I did." "Why?" I hesitated. "I don't know how to explain it." She didn't respond for almost an hour. Then, "I think you do. You're just afraid to." There it was. The door. Not swung open, but cracked, just enough. I didn't reply. I couldn't. Not yet. Instead, I went back to the studio the next afternoon. She didn't invite me. I didn't ask. I just buzzed, and when her voice answered, I said, "I'm downstairs." She let me up without a word. This time, the studio was warmer. There were candles burning along the windowsill. The scent of melted wax, of something herbal and familiar, drifted through the air. She was barefoot, wearing a soft gray sweater dress, sleeves pushed up again, hands dusted with white clay. She didn't speak at first, just handed me a mug of tea and went back to her workbench. I sat quietly, watching the back of her as she smoothed a curve into a half-formed figure. Her focus was total, unflinching, but I noticed the way her breath caught, the way her shoulders rose and fell differently now that I was there. Finally, she turned. "You're not just watching me," she said. "You're waiting." "For what?" I asked, quietly. "For something I'm not sure I should give you." I felt my throat tighten. "Then don't." She stepped closer. Not rushed, measured. "It's not that simple," she said. "You're young. You think time is elastic, that it bends for you." "I don't think that," I said. Her eyes searched mine. "Then why are you here?" And I didn't have a good answer. I stood up slowly, the mug still in my hand. "Because when I leave," I said, "it feels like I've forgotten something important." She looked away, down at the sculpture between us. "It's dangerous, what you're feeling," she said. "I know. And it's not going to end well." "Then let it at least mean something," I said. "Before it ends." For a long time, she didn't speak. Just breathed. Just stood in that quiet. And then, her hand reached forward, not fast, not sudden, but intentional. She took the mug from my hand and set it on the bench behind her. And then she stepped away, back toward the window. Without turning, she said, "Come back tomorrow, if you still feel the same." I went back the next day. Of course I did. She didn't confirm, didn't text, but I showed up anyway, just before 3. The buzzer answered quicker than usual, and when the elevator doors opened on the 3rd floor, her studio door was already ajar. Like she'd been expecting me after all. Inside, the space felt different, brighter, cleaner. A few finished sculptures had been moved near the windows, catching the pale winter light. The marble bust she'd shown me in the photo was now almost complete, neck extended, jaw softened, lips parted slightly like the figure had been caught between breaths. Helen was seated on the floor, barefoot again, a thick throw draped around her shoulders. There was an open notebook in her lap, but she wasn't writing, just holding a pencil, letting it rest lightly between her fingers. She looked up when I stepped in. "You came." I nodded, then closed the door behind me. She didn't move, just gestured to the other end of the rug. I sat across from her, the floor warm beneath me from a nearby radiator. For a long time, we didn't speak. Not because there was nothing to say, but because neither of us wanted to say the wrong thing. There's a silence that hangs between two people when both are afraid to change the shape of what's growing. Something precious and almost too fragile to name. "I was married once," she said suddenly, her eyes still on the notebook. "For a long time." I said nothing, just listened. "He was kind," she continued. "At first. Then he became ambitious. Then successful. Then," she trailed off. I waited. She looked at me finally. "He stopped seeing me. I became furniture, always there, quietly useful, until I stopped being interesting." My chest ached a little. Not out of sympathy. Out of recognition. That quiet way people fade from the rooms they still live in. He left. I asked. He didn't have to, she said. I left myself long before he did. She didn't cry. Her voice didn't tremble. But something behind her words did. A tightness. A careful folding in. I reached for the mug of tea she'd set out, lukewarm now, and handed it to her. She took it with a faint smile. You always know when to reach without asking. I don't want to ask, I said quietly. It feels like asking would make it smaller. She looked at me, really looked, and I swear, something inside her softened. We spent the rest of the afternoon like that, not talking about us, not even circling the line we hadn't crossed. She showed me her sketches. I showed her clips of the short film I'd been working on. She didn't say much about it, but the way she watched made my skin buzz. You shoot like someone who's trying not to wake a sleeping thing, she said at one point. I didn't know what that meant at the time, but I felt it. In my chest, in the back of my throat. Around sunset, she stood and stretched. I caught a glimpse of the small scar beneath her collarbone when the throw slipped. I didn't mention it. She didn't either. Would you mind walking me home? She asked, almost casually. I swallowed. Of course. She didn't live far, just a few blocks down, in a quiet part of town where the buildings thinned and the streets smelled like cold earth and rain. We walked side by side, not brushing shoulders, not touching. But every step felt synced, measured, like we'd done this before in another life. At her doorstep, she paused. The house was modest, dark blue. A rusted wind chime tinkled softly above the porch. She turned to me, hands tucked into her coat sleeves. I don't usually let people into the parts of my life that aren't carved from stone, she said. I won't take up space I'm not invited into, I replied. She smiled faintly. I know. The porch light flickered once. Her fingers reached for the key, but she hesitated. I want you to come back, she said, but only if you can survive the in-between. What's the in-between? The space where nothing's said and everything's felt. I nodded. I've been living there for weeks. She stepped inside. Didn't invite me in. Didn't shut the door right away either. Just looked at me. One long, loaded glance. Then, gently, it closed. And I stood there in the falling dark, aware of every breath in my chest. I didn't go back the next day, or the day after. I told myself it was because I was busy, editing deadlines, a gallery event to help prepare. But that wasn't it. The truth was harder to name. I needed to miss her. I needed to know if the pull I felt when I left her porch was real or just proximity, just the quiet echo of intimacy. But it was real. And the longer I stayed away, the louder that echo became. 3 days passed before she texted again. Helen Wexler. You left your notebook here. Come by before noon if you want it back. I hadn't left anything. When I arrived, her studio was colder than usual. A storm had rolled in overnight, sharp winds, sleet. The river outside had turned a slate gray, angry and fast. She was barefoot again. She always was, like she didn't need shoes to move through the world. Her sweater sleeves were pushed up, streaked with clay. She didn't greet me, just gestured to the small black notebook resting on the workbench. I walked over slowly, picked it up. It was mine, but I hadn't realized I'd left it. Thought you said you didn't write, she murmured. I don't. Not well. Anyway, you write the way you edit. Quietly, like you're afraid of being too loud. I met her eyes. Loudness always seemed like a kind of lie. Something in her face flickered, pain, maybe, or understanding. We didn't talk after that. Not for a while. She worked on a small piece at her wheel, clay spinning fast between her hands, and I sat near the radiator, watching her, watching the way she shaped things. I must have drifted off at some point. The radiator's warmth, the low hum of the spinning wheel, the rhythm of her breathing, it pulled me under. When I woke, it was twilight. The sky through the windows had turned lavender and bruised, and she was sitting beside me, close, closer than ever before. Her shoulder brushed mine. Neither of us moved. She didn't speak, just held out a mug of tea, warm, faintly herbal. I took it with both hands, careful not to touch her fingers. Outside, the wind moaned against the window panes. Inside, everything felt impossibly still. You ever feel like you're watching your own life from outside a window? She asked. I nodded. All the time. She glanced at me. That's why I like marble. It never pretends to be something else. It just waits. It doesn't need to prove anything. I turned to her, slowly. Her face was close. The line of her jaw, the soft crease near her mouth, the gray in her eyes. I wanted to touch her. I didn't. Instead, I said, why me? She looked at her hands. Because you see the world like it's already been broken once, she said. And I'm tired of being seen like someone who's never been broken. Her voice caught on that last word. Broken. A pause opened up between us. Long, heavy. I set my mug down. My hand, without meaning to, brushed against her thigh, just the edge of my fingers grazing the fabric of her sweater dress. It wasn't a move, not a gesture, just contact. Human, honest. She didn't flinch, but she didn't lean in either. Instead, she said, "If you kiss me now, I'll let you." I didn't move, because I knew, if I did, something would break. Not between us, but inside her, or maybe inside me. So I whispered, "Not like this." She let out a slow breath, almost a sigh. Then she turned her head and rested it lightly against my shoulder. Her temple pressed against the fabric of my coat. And we sat like that for a long time. Two people stitched together by restraint. I could feel her breathing, slow and steady. I could feel the way her hand hovered just a fraction of an inch from mine, not touching, but aware. It was the most intimate moment of my life. And neither of us said a word. The next time I saw her, spring had started to show itself. Barely, like a secret it didn't trust the world with yet. The river had thawed, and the trees along the path had just begun to blush with green. Everything was soft and uncertain. So was I? I hadn't heard from her in a week. No messages, no invitations. The studio stayed dark each time I passed. But she wasn't someone you called. You waited, or you didn't. And I waited. Then, on a Monday that smelled faintly of wet earth and new beginnings, I found her on the bench near the water. The one by the rusted railing where the older couples fed ducks and talked about small, permanent things. She was sitting alone, no coat despite the wind, just a thick black cardigan wrapped around her. Her hair was loose, wind-tossed. She looked tired, not in a way that worried me, but in a way that told me she had finally let herself feel everything at once. I approached quietly, unsure if I should say anything. She heard me anyway. "You didn't come by," she said without looking up. I didn't know if I was supposed to. "Would you have come if I had asked?" Every time. That made her smile. Barely. She didn't offer the space beside her, but I sat anyway. The silence between us wasn't tense this time. It was full, whole. After a few minutes, she spoke. I used to think I had all the time in the world, that the loneliness would end when I was ready for it to. But it doesn't work like that. You don't end loneliness. You learn how to carry it differently. I didn't try to respond. Then she looked at me, and that was all it took. That look held months of restrained glances, of brushed hands, of unsaid thoughts. It held the night she leaned on my shoulder, the mug she warmed between both hands, the studio light that always made her skin glow like marble. And it held the permission. I leaned in slowly, so slow it almost didn't happen, like I was afraid the air might shatter if I moved too fast. When my lips met hers, it wasn't fireworks or breathlessness. It wasn't hunger. It was quiet. It was the ache of relief. The feeling of something long held finally being let go, like exhaling after years of breathing too carefully. Her hand found the side of my face, fingertips light, almost hesitant. When we pulled apart, she didn't open her eyes right away. When she did, they weren't filled with certainty, just softness, and something almost like grief. "I shouldn't have let that happen," she said gently. "I know." She turned back, toward the river. "But I'm glad I did." So was I? We sat for a long time after that, not speaking, just watching the water move, slow and endless. When she finally stood, she didn't say goodbye. She just placed a small folded piece of paper beside me on the bench and walked away, calm, deliberate, the way she always moved. I waited until she was gone before I unfolded it. It wasn't a note, just a sketch. Me, sitting on that bench, alone, but drawn with such care that it didn't feel lonely. It felt remembered. That was the last time I saw her. Not because something went wrong, not because of shame, but because that kiss was enough. It wasn't a beginning. It was a conclusion. A quiet, human, necessary one. And I carry it with me still, not as regret, but as a moment that proved something about love we rarely get to see. That sometimes, its truest form is not in the having, but in the knowing you felt it. Deeply, once. And that it was real, even if only for a moment.